you the speaker for Samia's first webinar for 2020, who is Prof Basheka from Kapela in the University of Uganda. Just to give you an overview profile of who Prof Basheka is, Prof Benon Basheka is a renowned African evaluator who heads the Department of Governance and is also Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Kapela University in Uganda. He is also a visiting professor and research fellow at the University of Johannesburg, and he's also a consultant in evaluation. Prof Basheka is an accomplished academic with 2 PhDs, 2 master's degrees, 2 postgraduate diplomas, and 1 bachelor's degree. He has authored more than 80 articles in internationally accredited journals, more than 15 books and book chapters, and a number of reports and conference proceedings. So for the purpose of effective communication, we have pre-recorded his presentation, but Prof Basheka is attending, he's currently here and will attend, will be present throughout the recording. So what will happen is you write your questions and queries in the chat box that you see below you in front of your screens. And then the moderator at the end of the session will take in questions and Prof Basheka will answer to those questions. So we have 10 to 15 minutes. The presentation is about 45 minutes. And then we have a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A session. But before we actually begin the presentation, we'll just show Prof Basheka on your screen so that you can say hi before we begin. Sorry, Prof, you are mute. Please repeat that again. You are mute the other time when you introduced yourself.
Yes, I was greeting the participants from wherever they are during this lockdown. Nosy, you can hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Within a few weeks, because I hope you are all safe from this pandemic which has affected the world, and the social and economic impact of the pandemic is yet to be known, and it is only likely to be contained possibly by 2021. In today's presentation, I intend to share my views on how M&E can play a role in the COVID pandemic. And I will begin with briefly understanding the context of the pandemic. You are all aware that the global community since January this year has been racing down to contain the coronavirus disease, which has been codenamed COVID-19. COVID-19 stands for coronavirus disease of 2019. And it is a pandemic that has claimed lives and sickened thousands of people throughout the world. And in Africa, the virus has also spread to dozens of countries within a few weeks, because it only started within February. And government institutions, particularly the health authorities across the continent, are striving day and night to prevent the widespread of the infections. At a global level and within the national context, the World Health Organization has tried to issue guidelines to countries on what needs to be done. And the individual countries have themselves undertaken a number of measures to contain the virus. Among them includes the popular or the unpopular abrupt lockdowns and quarantining of people who are suspected. Some countries have repatriated their citizens, those which can manage, but in Africa, you know, most of them are still grounded in China, as you have heard. Countries have prepared the workplaces, and some have, a number of them have been closed to make sure they contain the virus. A group of networks of experts have been lined up to coordinate the surveillance of the disease, and the medical professionals are also involved in a number of activities, the chain of medical diagnosis, clinical care and treatment. Some countries have developed other ways to identify, manage the disease and limit the transmission. Travel restrictions almost are a common feature, and borders have been closed. Flights for those who had traveled have been cancelled, and the intention is to prevent the further spread of the disease. We, throughout the world, a number of events, meetings, and conferences which had been scheduled have been cancelled. Schools, institutions, religious places, businesses, and the curfews are a common feature where the people are encouraged to remain home. And some countries have tried to also distribute the food to the marginalized. Before we touch into the role of M&E, there are some mysteries of the pandemic and how it started. While some recent literature tends to point to 1st December of 2019 have been the start of the disease, some other information actually indicates it started earlier than that, because the first case appears to have been reported in China around the 17th November, but because of the information flow that couldn't, the world was not made aware. And even then, one wonders where it actually started in November. It could have started earlier than that. And the World Health Organization only managed to recognize the severity of the problem around 30th of January, when China officially communicated with the World Health Organization about the problem. And on 11th March 2020, the World Health Organization declared this a world pandemic. And in Africa, it is assumed to have been confirmed first on 14th February 2020, with the first case being reported in Egypt and in Nigeria. And most of the cases which have been identified in Africa were imported mainly from the United States and China. And of course, in some countries, they came from United Arab Emirates and Europe. The Al Jazeera, sometime in February, tried up to 14th February, tried to give the timeline. That in China, it was only on 31st December when China alerted the World Health Organization about this problem. Then on 7th January, France was able to confirm the first case in Europe. Then on 11th January, China announced the first death out of the pandemic. And on January 13th, this year, the World Health Organization reported cases in Thailand, which was the first case outside China. Then around 7th February, the Chinese doctor who is alleged to have been the whistleblower. This was a young doctor, I think around 33 years old. He sent a message to his colleagues about the pandemic, and he was penalized by the Chinese government for spreading rumors alongside his 8 colleagues. And eventually he died on the 7th of February. And around February 2nd, the first death outside China was recorded in the Philippines. And then on January 30th, the World Health Organization declared the outbreak to be a global health emergency which needed attention. And the name COVID-19 was given by the World Health Organization on the 11th of February. And then on 14th February, that's when we had the first case in Africa, which happened in Egypt. Experts have raised concerns about the spread of the pandemic as far as Africa is concerned, because the health systems of the continent are inadequate. It is also a belief that African systems lack most of the equipment and the funding desired to address the pandemic. That the continent of Africa has insufficient training among the health workers, and the data, the process of transmitting data within Africa is also inefficient. And the general worry, as far as Africa is concerned, is the likely economic impact of the pandemic, the social and economic impact that is likely to be great. There are mysteries about the virus. One is about the origin, where the scientists are trying hard to find out where it actually originated, whether it was from animals, from birds, or from human beings. And there is a hypothesis that the virus emerged at Wuhan. This is a Chinese city, a live animal market, as a result of interaction between an animal and human beings. But there is limited information about the exact date when it started, like I mentioned earlier on. And some scientists say that this virus is highly likely to have come from bats, but first passed through an intermediary, the animal. And that explanation is connected to the 2000 outbreak of another virus, which also affected the world, but not in the magnitude so far, as is the case with the coronavirus. The health professionals generally tell us about the 41 patients in China, and this is reported in one of the medical journals, and that the virus is primarily spread between people doing close contact, and there are some droplets which are produced when one coughs, one sneezes, or one is talking, and that the droplets can quickly fall on objects or onto the surfaces, but with certain medical procedures, they can hang in the air for longer periods, and that those who are affected also become infected by touching the contaminated surface, and then touching their eyes, nose, and mouth. You can find it on the door handles, on the car handles, on the tables in our offices, in homes, and so on. And in the experimental settings, it is reported that the virus has shown some resistance that can survive on surfaces for up to 72 hours. Now, directed to the purpose of the presentation, the question is whether there is any role monitoring and evaluation can play in the global pandemic of COVID, the coronavirus of 2019. if we are to assume that the monitoring and evaluation are used to assess the performance of projects, of programs, of institutions and their projects, then one may ask whether the corona is a project, whether it is a program, whether it is an institution, whether it is a program. But then if the goal of M&E is to improve the current and future management of the outcomes and impact, we have a strong legitimacy to claim that M&E is indeed vital in the corona pandemic. Because monitoring helps is a process of continuous assessment of programs, while because of the complexity of the pandemic and the abrupt emergence of this pandemic, we may not say per se it is a program, but the interventions which are being applied by governments are projects and programs. So we require some monitoring aspects on how they are working. And if an evaluation is about examining the effectiveness, the relevance, the efficiency, the impact, the coordination of the interventions, then M&E becomes necessary because governments are implementing a number of interventions. We want to check, for example, the relevance. As M&E practitioners, we want to check the relevance of the interventions which governments are implementing. We also want to check the effectiveness in the coordination mechanisms, for example, as well as the efficiency, the resources which are being used, because government is spending huge amounts of resources, financial resources, the private sector is contributing. So as M&E professionals, we would want to see the efficiency of the interventions and how the resources are being used across the various countries where the pandemic has created a huge problem. Then in the future, we would also want to see the impact of the interventions which are being made. In the medical technologies, M&E is useful in the hospital setup because it enables also the donors, such as the World Health Organization, the UNICEF, that have come to help countries address this pandemic. M&E helps them to know where their funds are being used. Now, there are waves of this pandemic. It started, like I mentioned, in December 2019. And by March of 2020, that's when March and April, that's when it is at its peak. And it is expected that maybe by mid-July, it will have started reducing. But the problem is only expected to be contained somewhere in 2020. That means at the moment, we are not sure of the social and economic impact of the pandemic. We also need to emphasize that the monitoring and evaluation are relevant to donors who need to assess whether the support they have given has landed in the right hands. And the M&E practitioners will emphasize is an exercise which is intended to make activities of government a bit more transparent and for governments to account for what they are spending. And in that regard, monitoring and evaluation serves the purpose of making what is done to be visible, because that is the only way of accounting. Monitoring also provides us with the tools and instruments which are necessary to communicate with the donors and the wider public throughout the implementation of the projects. Now, most of the interventions are in a project mode because they have a specific time frame. They have the constraints of money. They have constraints of the quality which is expected is also a constraint. Now, within the specific context of the pandemic, monitoring and evaluation are very useful. Specifically, M&E will help us to generate the information on the chains of the pandemic, the people who are affected, and those whom they infect. We should be able, the health professionals, using their own means, trying to collect information on the chains of the pandemic and how it is spreading from one country to the other. If, for example, monitoring had been effective, the time when it was discovered in China, possibly most of the measures would have been introduced early enough, and the spread of this pandemic would have been contained. Monitoring also can help us generate data on new infections and also on those cases which have recovered. There are reports that some of the recovered patients can again be able to contain the disease. So if there is adequate monitoring, it can help us to generate useful information on the trends of infections. And that's why countries are doing a commendable job of giving updates on what new infections have come and those who have recovered. And definitely monitoring also helps generate data on those who are suspected and tracking their contacts. Because it works like a chain. If one individual is infected, then they try to contact those whom that individual has associated with, and then the network continues. So it is monitoring that can help us to generate that kind of information. Also, the monitoring can help us to generate the behavioral patterns of those who are infected and they are confined in quarantines. There are some reports, for example, in Uganda, that those who are quarantined have not been practicing the social distance. Instead, they engage in some socialization, sexual activities. But if monitoring is done well, it can help us to generate data on those behavioral patterns, and then corrective measures can be undertaken. M&E monitoring also helps generate information on new measures which are being deployed by different countries. While some countries, for example, have undertaken total lockdown of their business activities, others have only taken restricted lockdowns. Tanzania, for example, which initially never closed most of the business activities, it is only about 2 weeks ago when it discovered that the problem was real, that has started closing. By mid-April, I think there was no reported case in Tanzania, but at the moment there are over 300 cases reported. Monitoring also helps us to document the global patterns of the disease, and monitoring can also help us to generate data on the impact of the virus on a range of variables. The impact, the changes can be both in the short run and in the long run. The social and economic impact of the virus may not be known at the moment, but the social disruptions, remember the churches, for example, are closed, the schools are closed, most of the businesses other than the essential businesses in most countries are closed, and the people who are surviving on business, during this pandemic lockdown, they are eating most of the capital. So one wonders what will happen when there is containment of the virus. So as M&E, we should interest ourselves, as M&E professionals, we should interest ourselves later in generating useful information to measure the impact of the virus on a range of variables. On the other hand, because there are two components, monitoring and evaluation. Evaluation would be very useful in, as I mentioned, in helping us to assess the relevance and effectiveness of all the processes which have been undertaken by different institutions of government during the pandemic. Then evaluation will also help us to check the efficiency and effectiveness of the different interventions I mentioned earlier on. The closure of the airspace, the closure of businesses, the closure of borders, the suspension of religious gatherings, the closure of schools, the stay-home campaigns. One has to assess the effectiveness and efficiency with which they have worked. The fight against the virus has also involved a number of institutions, ministries of health, for example, and the security organizations, the kind of coordination and how the institutions of government are able to work together. We can know the effectiveness of those the coordination mechanisms through evaluation. Then the outcome and the impact of the evaluation or the interventions by the virus will also be critical. Now, the influence, countries are struggling to flatten the curve. And flattening the curve, majorly they have emphasized social distancing as a major factor that can contribute to the flattening of the curve. But there is also a risk of resurgence of the virus once the interventions are lifted. I think the recent reports indicate some useful lessons on this subject. In Ghana, where they opened, and within a period of 1 week, there were a number of, in the range of 300 new cases discovered. And that's why countries have to gauge and check when should be the appropriate time to open the space, to reduce the lockdown, to open the borders, because trade has continued to take place. And once you open the borders, in the case of Uganda, for example, most of the new cases which are being reported are from truck drivers who are transporting goods from Tanzania and Kenya. So that needs to be taken into consideration. Now, in the next slide, I address my mind to specifically what should M&E professionals do in the global pandemic. There are a number of activities through which M&E professionals can participate. While we are used to, as M&E professionals, to evaluate interventions where there is baseline data, this pandemic does not have the baseline data. So as M&E professionals, we can engage ourselves in reconstructing the baseline data for the different interventions which are being implemented by different countries. And this baseline data can be reconstructed from the existing information sources available in different avenues. Secondly, M&E professionals, in my view, can undertake mid-term assessments of the interventions. For example, at the beginning of March, in the context of Africa, that's when most lockdowns, the stay-home campaigns were initiated. So we can undertake some assessments. Later in my presentation, I will indicate how that can be done, because everybody is at home, but there are at least there is technology. We can also advocate for funding agencies to emphasize the centrality of monitoring and evaluation. And we can also engage ourselves in developing the theory of change for COVID interventions, because this pandemic does not have at the moment a theory of change. And it is us as monitoring and evaluation professionals, we can engage ourselves in developing the theory of change for COVID interventions and how they can facilitate the actual impact assessments. At an academic level, I think it is our task to start developing some theories, the models, and frameworks explaining how M&E can be undertaken during this pandemic. And those frameworks have to take into consideration the the complexity of the problem, but also the necessity of different institutions. The centrality of government, for example, vis-a-vis the private sector, the centrality of the Ministry of Health, vis-a-vis the Ministries of Transport and the Ministries of Defense and Security. Those are variables which can be included as we develop the models and the frameworks for explaining most of these interventions from the M&E perspective. It is also my view that as M&E professionals, we should advocate to joining the national task forces as advisors, because the task forces, governments have constituted the task forces to advise on monitoring and evaluation, but there are no M&E practitioners, professionals, and this is our field. We know the subject well of the evaluation. We know the subject of monitoring. So it is my proposal that we should advocate, that we should join the national task forces to be advisors as far as issues of M&E are concerned. And then finally, as M&E, it is my view, we should participate in networking with health professionals who can give us the useful information that we can possibly later use in reconstructing the baseline data like I have mentioned. Now, as we do that, we could also, as M&E professionals, start collecting, analyzing, and interpreting the data to advise certain policymakers. We could also, as we engage in all of these activities, try as much as possible to generate the best practices on the various aspects. What is, for example, working in South Africa that is different from what is possibly in Ghana, that is different from what may be in Egypt, and then we map out the best practices on the fight against the pandemic, but these best practices can later be used whenever there are pandemics, health pandemics of this magnitude. We should also conduct online surveys of the effectiveness of the measures from the people perspective, because most of the people are indoors, they are in their homes, they know how they are being affected. So as an M&E, as M&E specialists, we can conduct online surveys. And this is possible because most of the people are online during this pandemic, and therefore we can easily get these online assessments done easily. And we can evaluate the effectiveness of all the interventions from different countries at different levels, and we suggest improvements that need to be done for countries which still have the problem growing, and then for future interventions. We must be, again, mindful that we are in a lockdown. People are not moving. It's selected a few are moving. Those who have clearance from the national governments and the task forces across different countries. So how can we undertake those activities that I have mentioned when we are in this situation? I propose 4 methods that we can use. One is to rely more on secondary data. The World Health Organization, for example, and other health bodies are producing useful information that you can analyze from an M&E perspective. The ministries of health are producing useful data that you can analyze, secondary information. The national task forces in different countries also are producing secondary information that can be analyzed, synthesized from the M&E perspective, and then we map out the different lessons that this data is giving us from the secondary literature that is available. Number 2, we should rely on the power of technology. And this is a lesson that we have possibly learned during this pandemic. That is technology which has remained working. You can transact online. Most universities are turning to online learning. Secondary schools are doing the same. The banks are transacting using online systems. So we should also, as M&E practitioners, rely on the power of technology. we can develop online group surveys within our community of practitioners and include other practitioners in different fields, and we can develop platforms, e-learning platforms for sharing experiences, as we also do the surveys talking about. It is also possible that we can use professional and multidisciplinary group experience we can share. For instance, what is the experience of the health professionals that we can learn as M&E professionals? What is the experience of people in the transport sector, those who are transporting, for example, the patients? What can we learn from them as M&E practitioners, and we share? And then it is also my view that across the number of M&E associations in Africa, we have a FREA, we have the South African Monitoring and Evaluation Association. We can develop specific information portals for sharing information to do with monitoring and evaluation in the context of the corona pandemic. Our professionals, our practitioners in M&E need to get information, and we should be able to develop useful portals that will give timely information to our practitioners on the global pandemic of corona. In doing this, we must be mindful, again, there are some challenges that we must experience and we must possibly address. One of them is the obvious that this is a new pandemic whose complexity still makes its information base evolving. Even the doctors, the medical practitioners, are yet to fully explain the intricacies around the virus. For example, on the reinfection, those who have recovered, how they can be reinfected, that information is still scanty. There's also been a mystery about whether it affects the aged, the old, vis-a-vis the young, and of course, the perception that the Africans are not dying as compared to the Europeans and the Americans and the Chinese. So as we do engage in the M&E activities that I have advocated for, we must be mindful that this is a new pandemic whose information is still evolving, and therefore we should check our minds that we should always be ready to take up new information that emerges. Number two, there are no wrong frames and indicators which have been developed for this pandemic, and therefore that can also present its own problem. And this could be one area to start with if we are to engage in monitoring and evaluation. Like I earlier mentioned, as we are constructing the baseline data, we could also work on developing the useful indicators. Like I mentioned, hardly do we have theories of change in this global pandemic, so that can present some limitation. And we lack baseline data for a number of interventions. And in some countries, people are yet to recognize that M&E is both a profession and a discipline. I'm sure when you advocate that we should be on the national task force, some people will start questioning our useful contribution. So legal recognition of M&E is still also a problem. Now, there are some lessons that I will share with the audience from my perspective, and I'm sure from this presentation, the members of the audience, they have their own experiences, they have questions, they have best practices they have learned. But in my own perspective, one of the lessons that is useful for us as M&E professionals to learn is the coordination mechanisms among agencies. It is very critical for the Ministry of Health, for example, to coordinate with the Ministry of Security, coordinate with the agencies responsible for distribution of drugs. That aspect is very, very vital, because no single ministry, no single agency of government is able to contain the virus without the cooperation of the other agencies. Number two, I also learned a lesson that the virus requires interdisciplinary approaches and interventions. Health alone, the medical profession alone, cannot solve the problem, because, for example, those who are affected and they are in the institutions of quarantine, they require social, psychological support, which may not be necessarily possessed by the medical professionals. The financing, most of these interventions require financing, and when you are dealing with government money, certainly you require accountability. So at some point, when this pandemic is contained, there will be so many audit queries about how most of these have been undertaken. Like I've mentioned, M&E is critical in this field. The centrality of governance, for example, as a discipline, because governments have taken the center stage by locking down by the countries, by preventing the people from assembling, by closing the churches and so on. It touches the centrality of democratic values, and the democracy and the political science become necessary in understanding the different aspects of this pandemic. Certainly, it is very useful for us to appreciate the importance of technology and the social media, not only in disseminating the information about the virus, but also about the interventions which are being undertaken by the government. In Africa, at some about 2 or 3 years, some countries have been trying to block, for example, their citizens from engaging in the most of the social media. In Uganda, for example, there is a tax on accessing some social media platforms. But this pandemic has taught us one lesson, that social media remains a vital tool for sharing the information, and alongside the social media technology is also very, very critical. As long as your telephone is connected, it also becomes necessary to share. Now, as the health professionals and the task forces are emphasizing, we all need to keep safe. And keeping safe, the World Health Organization has recommended one central element of the safety is keeping personal hygiene, regularly washing hands using soap and water, and covering our mouth. Unfortunately, I will make the presentation without the mask because I'm alone and in an office. But when you are with people, then you are supposed to put a mask and avoid coughing. Number 2, to keep safe, we are told we need to keep social distancing with 1.8 meters between yourself and others, particularly if those whom you are next to are coughing and sneezing, and that we need to avoid touching our face, eyes, and mouth with unwashed hands. And finally, as a mechanism of keeping safe for all of us, we are told we must avoid unnecessary and unprotected contact with animals, and be sure to thoroughly wash hands after contact. Those of the people who are farmers, if you are near a farm and you have interfaced with the animals, after that, wash your hands with soap, with water, and avoid touching your mouth, your nose, and so on. In conclusion, I may say that there is no pandemic in the recent past which has caused the social disruptions, the economic disruptions, and the political distortions in such a short period as the Covid-19, the coronavirus disease of 2019. I mentioned in my presentation that in Africa, it was only discovered on 14th February. But the entire continent is almost in a lockdown, although we are not as in a bad situation as it is the case in Europe and the United States. But the general point is that there is no pandemic in the recent past that has brought much misery as the coronavirus has done. In a period of less than 4 months, the pandemic has brought the world to its knees. With even top-pressed scientists unable to explain the origin and the causes of this pandemic. And scientists have tried to give their own explanations of the pandemic, but religious people have also done their explanations. Those who have a religious belief that the pandemic is showing the anger of God to the human beings for what crimes we have been committing. But the scientists certainly would not want to have that explanation. The other aspect in my conclusion is that good planning combined with effective monitoring and evaluation are very critical in enhancing the efficiency of the interventions. Like I mentioned, had the world undertaken effective planning and the monitoring of the situation when it was first suspected in China, because as of December, everyone in the world was saying, yes, Chinese, they are experiencing a certain virus in a certain city of Wuhan, and nobody ever discovered that it could actually affect the entire globe. At last time, if there was good planning by countries and effective monitoring and evaluation systems, possibly we wouldn't find ourselves in the situation in which countries and the world find themselves. Good planning will also help us to focus on the results that matter. And that brings the centrality again of monitoring and evaluation, because we should be able to learn the successes and the challenges we have gone through as different countries, as the different people, as the different institutions that are involved in this pandemic, as the global, the entire world. We need to learn some lessons and possibly plan for the next pandemic. Evaluation also applies the lessons and recommendations to decisions about current and future programs. And it is my view that evaluations can also be used to promote new projects. At the moment, throughout most of the funding agencies have switched to the COVID-19. Most of the grant proposals being written, they want to understand the dynamics about this pandemic. And as M&E professionals, it is our duty to emphasize these new projects. M&E should be emphasized, and we can get support from governments. We can raise funds from public or private institutions and inform the general public on the different activities which can be undertaken. These are my thoughts that I thought I would share with all of you, the audience. And these are not exhaustive. As you are aware, everyone is in the lockdown. And when I was contacted by Samir to make this presentation, I thought these ideas could be shared and they can be expanded, because M&E is an evolving discipline. No one has the monopoly of knowledge. And I'm hopeful, as we discuss after this presentation, some new ideas will come and they can inform my future actions, possibly to generate a research undertaking, an academic research project as far as this project is concerned. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Basheka, for such an informative presentation. Before I read out some of the questions, please may I remind you to submit your questions using the chat box on your screen. Question 1. How can M&E specialists overcome challenges such as politicization of information during the COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you. Professor Basheka.
Now, the politicization is usually a subject that you cannot avoid in any event. After all, politics is about power, who gets what, when, and how. As M&E professionals, my view is that we should do our work professionally as expected, produce the data, because even politicians, policymakers require evidence. So once the evidence is presented, then possibly it can influence policy making. But certainly the politicians will always want to change to what they want and what they expect. But once we present to them the data, certainly you'd also expect them to understand and appreciate. But as M&E practitioners, we shouldn't get worried or fear to participate in what I have proposed, simply for fear of politicization. After all, Plato said all of us are political animals, although there are more people who are more political than others. So we can play the technical politics of M&E and present the evidence which is needed.
Thank you. Next question. How can we design robust yet flexible M&E systems when we are getting new information daily?
Yeah, like I mentioned, one of the challenges I think I pointed out was the complexity of this pandemic. And I also proposed we need to reconstruct the data. I think I was recording some of the questions where someone asked, how can we reconstruct the data in this pandemic, which is again complex and the information keeps on changing. Now we can design M&E systems even during this pandemic, although the information keeps on changing, as long as we know what we want. For example, even if the information changes, the baseline remains the same. For instance, we know the baseline information on the first cases in different countries. We know the baseline information on when the first deaths were recorded in different countries. We can generate that baseline information. We can also generate baseline information on the number of reinfections as has been reported. We can also generate useful information on the number of variables in the situation before this pandemic, and then we use it subsequently to develop and design M&E systems. So the M&E system, remember, can be a tracking mechanism, and as we design it, much as the information keeps on changing, we should be able to have the baseline, and then whenever there is a change, subsequently it can be addressed.
Thank you. Next question. Given the internet limitation, when we try to reach respondents in rural areas, what technology or online tool do you propose here?
Yeah, I appreciate compared to the rest of the parts of the world, Africa still has low internet connectivity, but it is also true that the access to, for example, telecommunication services in Africa has been increasing. If you check the statistics, I'm sure the number of people who possess mobile phones has been on the increase in Africa. And I agree, not everybody has access to internet, but the majority have telephones that can access the internet. So there are a number of technological applications that can be used. The experts in technology can design software applications which can be able to generate the data we need. For example, we could develop a platform where people can enter the information that they want at any time when they can access the internet. and you do not expect, certainly in this context, to get to every part of the rural area. And as such, we use a sample. Those who can access and provide the information that we need, then we can extrapolate the findings from those ones and draw appropriate conclusions which can inform the people. I think in the audience, there is a gentleman called Robert, who is an expert in designing some of these online tools on how we can access information. Maybe can be given an opportunity to respond. How can you design an appropriate software that can target the rural, the rural population, and we get the information that we want, even within the constraints of the limited internet connectivity.
Thank you. Next question. Regarding legal recognition of M&E, has anyone tried or succeeded to get essential services status based on the need to do M&E on emergency relief distribution?
That is a specific general question. My view is every profession, because we are claiming that M&E is a profession. Now, every profession, to reach a certain level of maturity, one of the benchmarks or characteristics is that it has to be legally recognized. And legal recognition usually means that the governments have an act of parliament, for example. If you check the accountants, they have an act of parliament that recognizes their existence and their contribution. The same with the doctors, the legal professionals, the medical practitioners, and so on. Now, we find ourselves in a situation where a number of professions are emerging, but they are yet to be legally recognized. And in situations of emergencies, and the need to get the services, I think no one has ventured into this field. But it raises a number of opportunities. It raises at the same time a number of challenges. While some people assume that in emergency situations you can do whatever you want, normally there are restrictions. For example, I think yesterday or the other day, the president of Uganda was giving his remarks, and he raised one point where our MPs had allocated themselves money from the National Corona Task Fund. And he was saying they are not accounting officers, they are not procurement officers. So he instructed the Auditor General to do an investigation on how they did the procurement. So while it may appear to be an emergency, still there are rules and regulations which have to be followed. So this question, I think I can request also the audience to address their mind on it.
Thank you. Next question. At a strategic level, I see a lot of policy changes in different countries post-COVID-19. Professor Basheka, can you comment on that?
Yes, certainly the pandemic has caught everyone off guard in a number of dimensions, from the politics to the social arrangement, to the economic setup, to the technological use. So one would expect that after COVID is contained, there will be so many policy changes in a number of areas, unlimited. So far, if you check most of the donors who are calling for grant proposal submissions, they are trying to check the impact of this COVID-19, and certainly most of those projects and the researches which are being undertaken would certainly result into recommendations which will lead to policy change. For example, if I may pick some areas in education, this pandemic has caught everybody off guard. While we have been, some of us have been advocating for online teaching, at the end of the pandemic, I'm sure everybody will have to rethink a lot of policy changes as far as online teaching and delivery is concerned, because that has appears to be the only solution Two, in the area of health. In the past, before the pandemic, of course, the rich, whenever they would fall sick, they would fly over to Europe or maybe South Africa because you have advanced health systems. They would go to America. But this pandemic has taught us one lesson. It has brought equality. We can suffer together in the country. And even when you have money, you cannot fly to go and seek medical attention. So I expect after the pandemic, there will be some policy changes regarding how governments treat the health systems of Africa. The third area, possibly where policy changes would emerge, would be on the use of technology as far as providing services is concerned, and the delivery of general government services. The other area where policy changes may occur could be on handling emergencies which are not planned. Certainly, like I mentioned, there are a number of useful lessons that we learn from this experience, and the policymakers, the technical experts, the advisors, the researchers would recommend a number of policy changes after this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Professor. And this leads us to our next question. There is much debate and discussion regarding the reopening of schools. M&E in this sector by educators and principals will be crucial and should not be the terrain of expert researchers alone. This, however, has the potential to overwhelm foot soldiers on the ground. Professor, what are your thoughts on this and how to collect data meaningfully?
Now, the idea of reopening is of schools and the entire economies, the businesses, the religious places of worship, is a result of what the people are going through. Now, there are two theories, there are two opinions around that. Some people are saying, okay, let's open up and go back to normal. They are not looking at the dangers that await that decision. And others, the other theory, there is a group which are saying, no, let's wait and first watch what happens. I've given you an example. In Ghana, I think they did the reopening, and within a few days, they were able to see more 300 new cases emerge. It requires evidence, and in our case in Uganda, for example, they have commissioned, I think, a survey of 20,000 respondents, and the outcomes of that survey should be able to inform the decision of reopening. Remember, reopening, the countries closed down the schools because they were concentration areas where the disease could easily spread in a fast manner. Now, there are some people I've read somewhere, some are proposing that let's open the boarding sections, they start teaching, while those who are in the day schools remain, but you cannot have a curriculum taught to the same types of people, and then some study and others do not study. So my view is the task forces, the governments should carefully analyze the prevailing situations, the risk areas, before they can make a decision to reopen. Because once we reopen and there is a occurrence of this pandemic within the school setup, you can imagine the number of cases that will emerge, especially within those vulnerable children. The children, you may talk about social distancing, but once they go back, they cannot fail to shake hands, they cannot fail to play with their friends, and so on. That's my view. It should be a carefully decided matter, which should be based on evidence and what the global world is posting. That's part of lesson learning. Which countries have opened up the schools and what has been the experience. Once we learn, we do a trend analysis of those events, then as Africa, we should be able to make an appropriate decision.
Thank you. Next question. Health versus economic dichotomy. How is it being handled now, and how is this going to be handled in future in light of COVID-19?
I didn't get the first part.
Health versus economic dichotomy.
No, the first one, I'm missing it.
Health, our health.
Health.
Yes, our health.
Health.
Versus economic dichotomy. How is it being handled now, and how is this going to be handled in future in light of COVID-19?
Now, countries have preferred health at the expense of economic aspects. That's why the businesses have been closed, and once the businesses are closed, that means people are not earning, and once people are not earning, they cannot save, and once they don't save, they cannot invest. These are some of the basic economic principles. But because of the precious nature of health and the life, you cannot have economies when people are dead. So I think the decision has been to let's first save lives, and then the economics will come later. So in the future, like I mentioned somewhere in my presentation, it is not known the economic impact of this virus to the global economies, but certainly you cannot expect it to be good news, given, like I mentioned, those who had businesses and for a month they have not been working, the little capital has been eaten. Those who had loans in the banks, much as governments are trying to say the banks should not put interest, but whether you are dead or not, you know, the banks have their philosophy, you have to pay back. And if you don't pay back, they will be able to take away your assets. So this dichotomy, it is difficult to balance at the moment. But in my view and in my prediction, the economic impact after the COVID-19 will be great to the economies across the globe. But it is likely to be more dangerous in Africa, because most African countries have been surviving on assistance from development partners. And once the development partners have also been massively affected by this COVID-19, we do not expect much inflows that will be coming to Africa. So we have to prepare ourselves for the consequences.
Thank you. Next question. What do you think the key lessons are from the current situation for the training of evaluators in informal and formal settings?
Yeah, I would say the key lessons, in addition to what I mentioned in the training evaluators in both formal and informal situations, is we have not, I think, addressed our minds as M&E professionals previously to how evaluation can be undertaken during emergency situations. So this is a useful lesson in my view. Then two, it also teaches us one lesson as we are training evaluators in both formal and informal aspects. We need to be mindful about the multidisciplinarity of the capacity that we give. M&E, you know, is a field that borrows from so many other disciplines. And I think in the chat, I saw one participant who mentioned that we should learn more from development evaluation, development assistance, development evaluation, I think, as far as M&E is concerned. So in training the next group of evaluators or the current evaluators, one key lesson, like I mentioned, is how to do evaluation in the case of emergencies, which you are not expecting, in the case of situations which are complex, where information keeps on changing, and where different explanations and mysteries around that subject keep on emerging, and so on.
Thank you. I think we'll take the last question. Why is M&E unable to develop log frames, performance indicators, and theories of change for this pandemic when we can use previous pandemics, such as the Spanish flu, as precedents?
I think M&E is not unable to develop the log frames. Neither is it unable to develop the theories of change. In fact, in my presentation, it was one of the proposals that let us, as M&E experts, one, reconstruct the data, but also try to develop the theories of change, and certainly the log frames and the indicators would come. And we can do so by using, because baseline data can come from either primary or the secondary existing information, as this question points out, from previous pandemics. Now, it is only where we can have a conversation like we are doing so on such a subject that the M&E practitioners can interest themselves in developing this. And I'm sure, as Samia, you can take a lead in calling upon the professionals. You can link up with the AFREA, the African Evaluation Association, that let's combine and try to develop the log frames, because COVID may not have ended. A new pandemic may also emerge, and therefore it needs to find us ready in as far as putting these log frames and the theories of change are concerned.
Thank you, Professor. One last question. What advice do you give to, or do you offer to, emerging evaluators in this light?
The emerging evaluators?
Yes, in light of the pandemic, do you have any advice for them?
Yes, the advice really is, yes, they are emerging evaluators. They need to know that M&E is a field, is a profession, is an academic area of study that is not relatively long compared to other professions. And even in the conditions of emergency, still we have a lot to share. We can learn the best practices and use that information for future use. The emerging evaluators should also associate more with the senior and experienced evaluators to make sure we learn. Because my philosophy is we can build capacity, but we can build a better M&E society by passing on the information we have to such a group of new evaluators.
Thank you. Professor Basheka, that seems to be all the questions answered. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, maybe before that, I was reading through the chats, and some gentleman, for example, said, no, there are two comments. One said M&E seems to be pronounced whenever there are scandals or whenever there are whistleblowers, and was questioning the strategic role of M&E. And that again comes to the message I have been advocating, that M&E has a role to play. The second comment I saw, someone was saying, God is not angry with us. Because I think I touched that subject. Some people have tried to give religious explanations of the pandemic. Usually throughout the human history, whenever something is not explainable by man or woman on earth, then the last explanation remains to God. Even when you go in a law, they have the legal, the theories of law that originate from God. So to the person who made that comment, the religious people have their own explanations. And indeed, how do you explain a disease which emerges and all the world economies, the vaccine has not been discovered yet? Imagine the human resources which are available. Imagine the spread of the virus and how it has affected everybody. You can agree to some extent with those religious people that there must be some possible explanation which is associated with God. And I think in the Bible, the story of Jacob, when he was suffering, and no one could explain, but eventually they had to find the explanation. In Africa, as I conclude, as you requested, there are cases, I think today or yesterday, Egypt was posting the highest number of cases. Countries like Morocco, countries like South Africa were also, I think, above 5,000 cases. And other countries have few cases. So we should do a comparison and find out why there are so many cases in those countries and why there are few cases in other countries. But overall, the message to all of us is let's be safe. Let's adhere to the guidelines given by the national governments and the World Health Organizations. Wash your hands and do not touch your faces, although sometimes it is difficult. And make sure you keep safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Basheka. I would like to thank Professor Basheka for presenting this webinar session today, and to our loyal SAMEA members for attending. We hope you will join us again next month for another webinar session. Further details will be on the various SAMEA communication platforms. Lastly, a short feedback survey will be emailed to you shortly. We would appreciate a response from you. Many thanks and stay safe.
Thank you.